to the Feast of Dedication. We're going to be looking at the Feast of Hanukkah. We are going to look at the traditions, we're going to look at the histories, and we're going to look at all of the books. And there's a lot of information. I don't know how my screen capture works here. So anyway, let me do this slide and see if I click and it comes up correctly. So Hanukkah, which means dedication. If you look at the patriarch Hanak, it's almost the same root word. So it is to dedicate. And the Feast of Dedication is an 8-day festival observed by Judaism to commemorate the rededication of the Second Temple period in Jerusalem. Do you have a copy of my screen? Okay, great. So this was after the desecration of the Seleucid Greek regime of Antiochus Epiphanes, particularly the fifth. And this was during the Second Temple period. So what we have is first, second Maccabees. There is also the Megillat Ta'anit. Josephus, I will cover that great deal. And there are some other texts. Now, as we go through this, we will notice that the traditions of Hanukkah are different than the history of Hanukkah and what is stated in the books. So I have to state that. So wherever you're coming from, whether you've celebrated it all your life or you're just knowing it, I'm sure with the information that I present should offend everybody in their tradition, so it should be a lot of fun. So the festival remembers both the military victory of the Maccabees, those brothers and the sons of Matthias Maccabees, and those are supported by the rabbinical traditions. And then you also have the fulfillment of the covenant, the religious freedoms and different. So let's look at the historical background. You've got after Alexander the Great. Now first, he is the son of Philip of Macedon. And Philip of Macedon, I personally believe, descended from Esau and the Edomian kings. So after Alexander the Great's empire split and he died at a young age, his empire was split up and it was a worldwide empire that went all the way up to the Caucasus, the Russia, India. It was a big territory. So around 168 before the Christian era, so this is about 168 years before that, Antiochus Epiphanes issued a decree banning certain religious practices, so circumcision, keeping of the Sabbath, temple sacrifices, the study and practice of Torah laws. And he desecrated the temple, turning into a shrine of Zeus and sacrificing swine on the altar, and the soldiers urinated on the property, thus totally defiling it. Now, the question is, if you are defiled, what can make you clean? And if you're clean, what can make you defiled? And I think you've got to realize from all of this and the history that we are the temple that needs to be dedicated. That is the lesson. In fact, when you look at the Pharisees at the time of Messiah, they said they were the temple or the priests of their house. And they missed the point that they are the temple, the dwelling place of the Ruach HaKodesh. So at this time, there was no clean place for Yahweh to be, because he cannot be in a defiled house. So concerning the wicked rule and the who desecrates, if you go to Daniel 8:9-14, do you have scriptures up, Johnny? Let me pull mine out also.
I got mine right here. I'm looking for it, Daniel.
Yeah, Daniel chapter 8, and read 9-14.
Okay, as soon as I find Daniel. So, he's at... ¿Dónde está? Antes de Proverbios. Yeah. Oh.
So, Daniel 8, 9
Yeah. All right, almost there.
through 14.
It's going to be page 917. All right. 9, Daniel 8.
Not Daniel 9.
Daniel 9.
Chapter 9 through 14. And this is concerning a wicked ruler who desecrates the sanctuary.
9, what? Daniel 9.
No, excuse me. Chapter 8, verse 9 through 14. That was my mistake.
It's okay. 9. Okay. And from one of them came a little horn, which became exceedingly great toward the south, and toward the east, and toward the splendid land. And it became great up to the host of the Shamash. And it caused some of the hosts and some of the stars to fall to the earth and trampled them down. It even exalted itself as high as the prince of the host, and it took that which is continual away from him, and threw down the foundation of his Mikdash. And because of transgression, an army was given over to oppose that which is continual, and it threw the truth down to the ground, and it acted and prospered. Then 13. Okay.
Yeah.
Then I heard a certain Kodeshi speaking, and another Kodeshi said to that certain one who was speaking, till when is the vision concerning that which is continual and the transgression that lays waste, to make both the Kodesh place and the host be trampled underfoot? And he said to me, for 2,300 evening, morning, then that which is Kodesh shall be made right.
Okay, so when we look at that, this is in the part of Daniel, it's talking about three nations, beasts that come together. And if you can't see Philip of Macedon and Alexander the Great, and then the kings that come out of him when he died. So when you look at Antiochus, and also in Mitzrayim, it was Ptolemy. And at one point, Antiochus Epiphanes even went down and took that reign as well. And that's really, at that time, that's when the Herodians come in. Now, I'm going to get to all of that. I don't want to do an awful lot of reading for the simple fact we've got so much to cover. But I thought that was an important one. So, the Maccabean revolt. There was a priest, and this is from the royal line that we will see from Nathan in Luke chapter 3. So Matthias ben Yohanan and his sons, especially Judah Maccabees. And Maccabee means the hammer. And it is a very good description of what he did. So they rose in revolt because they were absolutely revolted by what Antiochus Epiphanes was doing. And their uprisings recorded in 1st Maccabees and 2nd Maccabees. So it first is basically guerrilla and the battles of resistance. And in 2nd Maccabees, you have more of an emphasis of intervention of Yah, and also the martyrdom of the Torah-filled believers. And after several years of fighting, the Maccabees recaptured Yerushalayim and restored control over to the temple. So the dedication of the Hakel, the Bet Yahweh, I believe that it was always dedicated to Yahweh as the Bet Yahweh, and then over time they removed the name and it became the Hakel. That's just my take on things. So once the Greeks were expelled, and we're going to be rethrashing some of these things, the priest purified the temple, they rebuilt the altar, and rededicated the sanctuary. And this is from Maccabees chapter 4 in the first book. So let's look at 2nd Maccabees, because this is a history, and then 2nd Maccabees reinforces the same. It is from a different point of view and different events. So it expresses to Sukkot, explaining why it lasted 8 days. Historically, the initial 8 days are based on the Maccabees' intention to keep a delayed Sukkot, which they had not been able to observe during the war and the desecrated time. So you get this miracle of oil. There's only enough oil for, a couple of days, and it takes a long time to get it consecrated, and it was a miraculous. And you know what? Okay, if it happened, that's great. That comes from the Babylonian Talmud, the traditions. So whether it happened and it was recorded, I will give them the benefit of the doubt, but I will tell you what, the true history of Hanukkah is so much more exciting, so much more miraculous, so emotional, as you will find out, because there are parts of it that are truly horrible. And if you think that we live in a time of persecution, this is where you'll find what it is. Can we absorb that kind of persecution? And we'll get into some of that. So I'm going to skip through a lot of these. Why the 8 days? The Sukkot replacement, and I think they were doing the Sukkot at the different time at the 25th of Kislev. By the way, the Messiah was born on the 26th of Kislev, and I will say born because that is when he was conceived. The light entered into the world at the Festival of Lights, Hanukkah, and 9 months later was born on the first day of Sukkot, moved to a sukkah, or manger, if you will, and then on the 8th day that Jacob set up, the last day that I've covered in some of my other shorter presentations, that the Messiah was circumcised. And that is even recorded by Isaiah in the vision of Isaiah. So the Talmud and Shabbat 21b, this is a later rabbinical miracle story widely taught through Judaism, embraces both explanations simultaneously of the military and the spiritual significance. And they've merged it into one big happy holiday. So you also have this thing that we see all the time, is the 9-branch menorah. Anywhere in all of the scriptures from Exodus to Revelation, it has a 7-branch menorah. You have the lamps that come up and the Shamash, which is here. So you have the Shamash, which is the servant, and it lights the rest of them. In fact, when the true lamp in the sanctuary was lit, the Shamash, the upper candle, lit the others, however. So the Shamash is used to light. It keeps separate because Hanukkah lights are not for the practical use, but for commemorating that miracle. And it's mostly what we know as the 8th branch is tradition. It's very nice. It's interesting, but we want to get past that. We want to get to the root. We want to go, what were the men that were dedicated to Yahweh? Were they keeping this? Or did they say, oh, it's an added holiday? So, why the synagogues and Jewish homes keep this tradition, the memorial of the deliverance, the sanctity of the temple, etc. Now, if you go to Proverbs chapter 20, verse 27, the spirit, the ruach of man is the lamp of Yahweh. And in Psalm 18, Tehillim 18:28, you are the light. So you light my lamp. So a kindled fire is supposed to be in the temple, on the lampstand, and as the New Testament teachers and the prophets, the patriarchs, said, don't you know you are the temple of the Ruach HaKodesh? So we should be making sacrifices within us. We should be keeping our oil full by reading the Word and lighting others. Because we are to be the Shamash. So, not by might or by power, but by my Ruach. This comes from Zechariah chapter 4, verse 1 through 6, where he is showing a vision of the golden lampstand and his declaration. It's not by power or by might, but by the Ruach of Yahweh. So we have these rituals of Hanukkah. So lighting of the Hanukkah, which a Hanukkah is a 9-branch menorah, and each night an additional candle is lit, beginning with the first one, and giving the blessings, which we will give also. So this also comes out of Hillel and a lot of the Talmudic writings. So when you go to Numbers 7:1, it talks about the dedication of the altar, and it is across an 8-day period. So the traditions of eating fried foods, latkes, make a fried potato and you cook them and it's kind of a potato pancake, a latke. And we've done this for years because you know what? They're delicious with applesauce and a little bit of sour cream. But another thing that should be expressed is giving, charity, being, and I think that is where the traditions of the gifts for both holidays, because I believe that Xmas, throughout the history of Great Britain, Rome over those 300 years changed the name and the traditions. So Xmas be really at the time of the 25th of Kislev, and that's why they celebrate the birth there, where the light came into the world. So the other thing that I was going to mention is the dreidels that they would spin, that was gambling, and I don't even know if that is absolutely true. Yeah, Johnny.
Hey, can I, you know, Xmas is, Zeus worship, Jesus, right? And the Maccabees were fighting off a statue of Zeus put in
Yep.
their temple. So, I mean, this connection of the counterfeit and this fighting against this other tradition trying to, overtake the temple. I think that conflict, and that's why, yeah, favored the Maccabees to get that nonsense out of their. But yeah.
Well, okay, and this kind of brings me to another point. The lighting of the Shabbat candles. And I know if you've ever been in a Messianic congregation or a Jewish synagogue, that there is a lot of emphasis put on, when the Shabbat starts, you light the candles. And I have looked for years. I have never found any scripture that points to that except from the Babylonian Talmud. Honestly, I cannot see Yahweh telling Moshe or any of the patriarchs or the prophets to light candles.
And they make it a commandment of Yahuwah. Yahuwah, God told us to light the candles, and he didn't say that in the Torah nor the prophets.
So we're going to go through the different blessings, the kindling of the Shabbat lights, and you have to realize, this is really supposed to be applied internally. So the traditions of the Shabbat lighting candles, or the Nerot Shabbat, it does not originate with the written Torah. There is no explicit command in Bereshit, Shemot, Vayakra, Bamidbar, or Devarim instructing women or men to light candles before Shabbat. Instead, this practice comes from Torah-observant Jewish traditional during the Second Temple period, later preserved in the Mishnah and the Babylonian Talmud, and the rabbis established it for three main reasons: the Kavod Shabbat, honor of the Shabbat; the Oneg, or the enjoyment, or a delight, that's the gathering and eating; and then Shalom Bayat, which is shalom in the home. So I'll skip a lot of the details, but some of these are kind of interesting. The blessings for the two candles. So it starts out, Baruch atah ya ala Yahweh Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvato v'tzivanu lekner shel Shabbat. And that is the way that I learned it, before my bar mitzvahs and so forth. And I learned it, of course, many, many, many years ago with Adonai or Hashem. And it wasn't until a wise man, the herald told me the name of Yahweh that truly changed my life. Because how can you have the name of the Father in J-E-M-U-N? And he opened my eyes to the name of the Messiah. And when you think about Hanukkah, the Feast of Dedication, it is all about him, Yahshua. So, we'll skip those blessings. So, in Maccabees Rishon, this is the first book of Maccabees. I highly recommend the Et Sefer because it does have the restored name of Yahshua, or excuse me, of Yahweh. And so it is the most historically valuable, and it is the only book that traditional Jews may ever go into, and they hardly ever do. It's much like the Christians going into the Old Testament. They rarely do, and it's only to, get that one point to prove their point. So, this happened in about 175 through 135 BC. So it is a substantial amount of time. It recounts the oppression of the Yuhadim. So it is the tribe of Yada that is still in the land, connected to Benjamin. And then there were Israelites that would come as well, just like in the New Testament period, but they were from the northern tribes. They were welcome. So you have Antiochus Epiphanes, and then the rise of the Maccabean family, and the eventual establishment of the independent Hasmonean or the Hashmonean kingdom. Now, the reason for that is, and I'll get into the genealogy if we have time, the last brother of the Maccabees, after they were all killed in battle, is Simeon. Simeon, in the genealogies of the Messiah in Luke 3, and that is where you get the Hashemites and the Hasmoneans. So that is something that most people do not connect, because that's how it connects to the Herodians, and I'll explain that here in a minute. So the Hashmonean kingdom, it explained why Hanukkah existed, and there were a family of Levites from the house of Hashmon, and that is how, when you think about in the genealogy of the Messiah, you have Mary, who is related to Elisheba, who is a Levite. And then her father and her line is of the line of David in both directions. So it gives a historical context for the genealogies, all of the high priests, the Melachim, the kings, the ruling authorities referenced in the Gospels. So this one here, I've got quite a bit here. This is kind of a summary of the people. You've got Antiochus, the Antiochus III, and it kind of gives, but it goes down, and these are people, for instance, Simon Thaddeus, and the murder of his son-in-law, Ptolemy. So Ptolemy is his son-in-law, and I can connect this to Philip the Tetrarch. I can firmly establish that he was originally married to Mary Magdalene of Magdal, and I'll go through that another time, but I'll skip this. But for the book of Maccabees, this is kind of a summary. It's the foundation history of the narrative of the Seleucids, which are the Greeks, and the aftermath of Alexander the Great. So, against the backdrop, Matityahu of Modin, and this, I believe, they are from Great Britain. These are the Great Britain kings, and I will prove that later. So, he arises and catalyzes a revolt against what Epiphanes was doing, because he was literally making everybody eat swine, not practice the Shabbat, no circumcision. And when we get to what happened with in the 4th book of Maccabees, which takes a turn, and it is an emotional one. So, First Maccabees basically sets up the entire second period temple world. The restoration, the national identity, the practice of the Cohens, the expectations of deliverance that shape the era in which our Messiah Yeshua comes to. So some of the historical facts: the Hashemites are the Levites, they are the priestly line, and they are also with, I will show here in a minute, they are linked back into the Druid line, which is the original sons of Judah that were sent up into that land. And they, I'll get to this later, so I won't do the spoiler alert. So, the eventually lines mixed of the Herodians, and that's where you get Caesar of Rome and of Herod and the other Idumean kings. So when you look at the line through Nathan in chapter 3, it is different than Matthew 1. So therefore the Hasmoneans play a major role in the Second Temple period, but they are, let's skip that part. So, Second Maccabees, it is a record similarly. So it's not a sequel, it parallels the history in retelling. So the narrative opens with 2 letters sent to Yehuda in Mitzrayim, urging the annual observance of the 25th of Kislev, the Feast of Dedication, commemorating the temple dedication. So the book then recounts how Antiochus Epiphanes attempts to enter into the temple. He basically, with great arrogance, pushes his way past the temples into the Holy of Holies and basically gets stricken with leprosy. And then when he prays, Yahweh heals them, and the dirty little hypocrite goes back and does the same thing, attacking the temple. So you've got to read the whole text from verse 1 to the very end of the book. Otherwise, you don't know what's going on in context. And that's what's happened in history. They take the traditions of men instead of spending the 4 hours of reading a really good story. So I'm going to skip to 3rd Maccabees. And it is not directly connected to the Maccabean revolt. Okay, the narrative begins after Ptolemy's victory, and when he attempts to enter the Holy of Holies, the Kodesh Kodeshim of Jerusalem, struck down by a divine power. Oh, this is that story, pardon. He leaves humiliated and resentful, returning to Alexandria. He unleashes a campaign against the Yehudim, attempting to register them as Greek citizens, and that would pollute them in itself, which would strip them of any legal protection, and it would have been a destruction. So the scroll emphasizes the power of prayer, and it's really, when you read the prayers in this book, they're powerful. Yahweh's ability to overturn wicked rulers. And the plot, it basically centers on Ptolemy's orders that all the Yehudim be forced into the arena. Now, the arena is mentioned as the Greek gymnasium. When I look at it, that is the Antonius Fortress. That's the big flat area up there with the Dome of the Rock. So he brings the Israelites from all over the world. They rowed their boats from the Americas, from all over Babylon, and when he got them there, let's see if I'll just read it, because what he did is got the army of 300 elephants and thousands of the Greek and the Seleucid army that are all ready to destroy these thousands of people that are on the gymnasium, and they're all mourning each other. I love you, it's been a wonderful life, and they're all crying, and I'm reading the narration, and I'm bawling in it. And there is a priest that gets up, a Simeon, and he calls forth to Yahweh to remember all of the mighty things that Yahweh has done in deliverance of his people. And it's a long list. And as he gets to that, and everybody's hugging each other, they're consoling each other. And behind them, unbeknownst to the people, the heavens open up, and the army and the elephants see the giant angels behind them blowing their trumpets. It was not seen by the Israelites, but the texts say that the elephants that were induced by drugs turned around and trampled Antiochus Epiphanes' army. And the rest of them picked up their swords and started hacking at each other. That sounds familiar. Then Antiochus Epiphanes, the crazy man, comes to his senses and says, "Oh, good, you're all ready. Bring out the food from the royal storehouses, and let's have an 8-day party." So when you realize the 8-day Hanukkah celebration really comes from that, Antiochus Epiphanes coming to his senses. He goes crazy again afterwards, but I think it's quite the interesting story. Now, getting to the 4th book of Maccabees. If you say you are dedicated to Yahweh and can take and will take anything that comes our way, Hanani, you need to read the 4th book of Maccabees. I have read most all of the text, anyone that I can find, and narrate them. This is one that I cannot get through without absolutely bawling. So Eleazar the Cohen, and the 7 sons, it really shows the power of a Torah-governed reason over the fleshly fear. And the book starts out, it's strange from any other Hebrew book. And it's basically saying, let me ask you a question of philosophy. And does reason rule over conviction? And it's very philosophical. And then it goes into the story of Eleazar. Eleazar the elder, revered Cohen. Eleazar was 90 years old and radiant with integrity. He stands first when forced to the altar of the swine. So what Antiochus was doing was literally putting them on a gimlet, a rack, and pouring blood down their mouth. And they would not submit. So he declared, I will not betray the Torah of my fathers. Even if you tear me limb from limb, I will not eat what is forbidden. Because he knew that the youth would notice and see his example and do the same, and he would not have that on his conscience. So then you have a widow and 7 sons. Now first, the widow obviously has lost her husband, who is probably a very wise, very brave, learned man. So the 7 brothers followed Eleazar, who was murdered, and each giving testimony before their deaths. And the first son says, better to die in purity than to live in defilement. And he was tortured. The second watched and said, you release us from this life, but the King of the universe will raise us to everlasting renewal. The third son, watching his 2 brothers die and facing his own challenge, he says, we suffer for the convenient. You suffer because you wage war against Elohim Yahweh. The fourth, seeing that, says, our bodies you burn, but our souls you cannot touch. The 5th younger son, seeing this, said, we do not fear your tortures, we fear only Yahweh. The 6th, Torah is our life. Death cannot make us break it. And then Antiochus Epiphanes pulled the youngest son, who had seen his brothers and his father murdered, and Eleazar the priest, and he gives him a special deal. If you do this, I will make you rich and make you a powerful man, etc., blah, blah, blah-dee-da. I give up my body and breath for the Torah of my fathers. And then their mother, standing there, broken body, proclaims, I bore them for Yahweh, and his Torah, I send them back to him. Think about the faith of a mother. The climax of this declares the steadfastness. They defeat Antiochus more completely than the armies, providing faithful reasons and examples in Torah. And even though they lost their bodies, they triumphed over the fear and that sword. Now, something that I have been studying a long time, because the royal family of Yada, there are royal families and branches. But when you look, the line of Jeroboam was cut off. And I've found some very interesting information, but I've got to connect it together. So I'm kind of jumping around a little bit to put it together. The Druids are the ancient descendants of the first 2 sons of Yada through Shua. they and other nephews of Joseph, next to Pharaoh of Mitzrayim, sent them to the other nations that sold their gold and silver, their cattle and sheep and the best breeding stock, and then they went and sold the title deeds of their land that was given to them by Noah and Shem at the time of Peleg. The lands were separated. So when you look at Britain, the word Brit means covenant, like Brit Milah, circumcision, Brit covenant. Ish is man, so it means covenant man. The Ancient Triads, which is a book, let's see, where to go? So this book here, it goes through the history of Ireland and Great Britain. It has the triads, and that's where I first found the 29th chapter of Acts. We'll get into that in a minute. So the triads of Ireland were preserved as an early British record. You have the 29th chapter of Acts, which is Paul the Apostle to the Gentiles going up across Gaul or Spain and into the British Isles, and it is documented there. So I think I can skip over that, but this is the important part. Joseph of Arimathea, which is a title, Aleph, Rama, Theo, Tav. So you have the first and the last. So he is Yehuda's British descendant. Constantine's lineage and British royal house traces to the conventional lines. He's not the British descendants from him, but he was the teacher that brought the islands, along with others, to believe in Messiah. So when you get to the line of Yada, you have those early sons, and according to the ancient lineage, the two sons of Yada from Shua, the Canaanite wife, departed from Mitzrayim long before 430-year oppression. So these sons, often associated with Zerach, particularly Darda and Kalkal. I've looked up a lot of the history of the Druids. I'll skip a lot of it. But when you have like Darda, that's the lawgiver, and different things. So you have the royal house of Ireland and Great Britain. They had civilization, education long before Rome, and Rome wanted their riches. They wanted the texts, the information, as Rome did to kill, steal, and destroy. So anyway, you have the Druids that came out of exile before the captivity in Mitzrayim. They practiced clean eating. They worshipped the most invisible high Elohim, even though they changed the names over the years because they were separated from what we know as Yisrael. So this is precisely what we expected from the house of Yadua living in the distant nations, to be keeping of Torah, and they were. So the British is not just folk enemy. It preserves both Older Welsh, a commentary in the Book of the Britons, which is a huge important text. We have the Book of the Romans, right? The Book of the Britons was written by Joseph of Arimathea and other of his disciples. And boy, it goes into some really interesting history as well as history of Great Britain. It talks about a knighthood that are around and isn't Lancelot at our midst who carries the lance of Lot. And it floored me because the man that sat at that table was a descendant of Moab, and he carried the lance of Lot. I thought that was fascinating, and it has been lost to history. So Jeremiah and Tepe. Now, Tepe, when you think about the name and all of the places, Tepe is an important name, and she was grafted in. She was the last royal line of the Jeroboam line, and Yirmiyahu, saved her life and took her up to the British Isles with lots of the temple treasure that the priest Joseph of Arimathea brought back with him at the dedication of Herod's temple. So she comes from the last remaining kingly line and certain priests, and she really was the temple treasure. So the prophetic task to uproot and plant in Ireland has a lot of history, and the princess known as Tepe married into the Zarok line of Judah, which was already ruling there. And in the way, like the Philippines, there were many kings and a high king over many kings, because there were many different tribes. The princess unified the split houses. So when you're talking about Ephraim and Judah and the branches coming together, that is a whole big part of this information to that prophecy. So why is the British genealogy carries the Yehudic royal line, and why British coronations recite echoes like Jacob's pillow, and that's what they coronate the kings, the Blarney stone, the Davidic throne symbolize, and so on. So when we get to Joseph of Arimathea of Britain and the Nazarene connection, Joseph of Arimathea, he is the Eleazar Yosef. He is a Cohen, a Melech, and he was also the Roman procurator two times before Virilis and Pontius Pilate. So it says he is the uncle to Yeshua. Most say that he is. I personally believe that he is the father of Miriam. And I also believe he is the disciple that Yeshua loved. That they asked, what about him? Is he to walk around and not die? Why would they ask that question? Why? Because if we look right up here, Eleazar Yosef. Remember, Mary and Martha, the sisters, wept at the funeral. And 3 days later, the Messiah Yeshua came. And he says, they sleep. Just roll the stone away. Lazarus, come forth. And they took the clothes off his face. So, you're left with Martha, who means matriarch or great governor, and Mart means death, Martha. So she is the governess, and that must be Anna, the mother of Miriam, the virgin. She is also known as Diana from her Greek royal British name and from the Palladium Britannica in Rome. So there she is known as Diana Helena, or Anna. I've got a bunch of these. So he was actually the procurator, and he was rejected by the Pharisees. And you need to understand that Joseph of Arimathea, without saying it, was the king. That's why he was paraded through Rome when captured. This is Caractacus. He goes by many names. There could be offs. You know, I'm kind of connecting some stories together with some sanity, but it's easy to connect the histories because it's hard to follow. But when you look at the king being rejected by the Pharisees, then it comes into play the empty tomb and why the body of Messiah was asked for by Joseph of Arimathea secretly. Why? Because everybody else was at his funeral. Could have caused an embarrassment. So he went to Pontius Pilate, who was a friend. It says that he was friends with not only Gaius Caesar, but Titus, and lived in their house. I personally, and you will see, I believe he could be one of two people for Josephus, Flavius Josephus, the historian. And I would have to say the Arimathea could be that term of appointment as the high place. Does that make sense? So Josephus knows all of the history of the Maccabean period. How? He starts writing in about 37 AD and knows everything. When you go into the writings, the life of Josephus, he tells his genealogy right there. It is the exact genealogy as Luke chapter 3. Dun, dun, dun! He's a descendant from Heli too. So when you get into Arimathea, let's look. After the crucifixion, he took Miriam up into the British Isles. There is lots of documentation. There is the grave of Joseph of Arimathea. So when you get into that history and in the book of the Britons, he took the information, the Bashar, to the Druids and the Celts, and they believed. In fact, the last king of the Druids died in the lap of Joseph of Arimathea, in love, in submission. And Joseph of Arimathea ended up being basically the last king of the Druids, who all converted to believing in Yahshua the Messiah. And it wasn't for another 300 years that Rome really changed the name in that time. I believe these all had the proper names, and unfortunately translations have come about since that time. But the Book of the Triads and the Glastonbury traditions, because Glastonbury is Camelot. If you want to look at King Arthur, I believe absolutely fully it is Joseph of Arimathea. The disciples, the knights, etc. And there's a lot of information there. Let's go to Paul's journey to the Britons in Acts 29. Traveling through Spain to the Isle of the Britons, which, in one of his other letters, I forget which, he promised that he was going to go to the uttermost parts of the world. That is the British Islands. That's what they were described as, the uttermost. So, Aristobulus was the first bishop of the Britons. I found out this is the brother of Lucius Luke, the first bishop of Rome before it got polluted. They were both sons of the king, probably not Joseph of Arimathea, because there were several. So they, Rufus is another brother, and they are in the Britannica Palladium in Rome. It's a giant dome that still stands today. So while he was there among the covenant keepers, affirming the ancient connections to Israel. So the first led by Paul, and then the second by Joseph, and the third by Aristobulus, Constantine, Helena, and the British royal descent. So let's go about 300 years in the future. You get a note about old King Cole, a merry old soul, a British king that was very popular, loved by the Britons, or most of them, some descendants always. But his daughter was a beloved princess named Helena, who we know as Helena of Troy, but she was a British queen, daughter of King Cole. Her son from the sitting Roman Emperor Constantinius, her son was Constantine. He was born on the island of Anglios, which is an island on an island on an island in Ireland, apparently. 300 years changing to the pagan names, and that's where we get Constantine marching on Rome with his army, and then going into Byzantium and renaming that as Constantinople. And that is where you get the Eastern Orthodox churches and the Western Roman Orthodox churches, or less Orthodox, and the rift that comes from that. And when I started realizing it is really a rift between Rome and Germany, or Rome and Great Britain. What Josephus says about the Feast of Dedication lights. So if you go to Book 12, Chapter 7, Section 6 through 7, and boy, it's fun to find addresses in Josephus. So, but it says, after the armies of Antiochus, the king of the Seleucids, were defeated, the leader, Judah Maccabee, assembled the people to turn them to go up to Jerusalem to purify the temple and offer the appointed sacrifices. So here we've got a full other account from what happened in the Maccabees, all leading up to the New Testament period as foundation. And Josephus writing this over after the fact, but from memory, because he lived through it all. Judah purged itself carefully, removed the defiled altar, built a new altar, made unhewn stone, without iron tools, replaced the sacred vessels, the golden menorah and the lampstand, the table of showbread, the incense altar, the curtains, and the doors. This is mentioned in Josephus. On the 25th day of Kislev, called Apollinus by the Greeks. That is what you would get from Xmas. They lighted the lights that were on the menorah, offered incense on the altar, placed the loaves on the table, and offered burnt offerings on the new altar. And by the way, it was not because of the 25th of Kislev or the day of Apollinus. That was a year after the temple was desecrated. So the declared an 8-day festival. The 8 days were celebrated in the restoration of the temple worship. They feasted, rich, splendid sacrifices, and sang lots of fun songs. And Josephus also adds the festival established the Torah for the descendants and to be observed annually, that the Yehudim at his time still observed it. So they were doing this at his time, calling it the Festival of Lights. He suggested the name came from liberty to worship being brought to light or restored after years. So the summary, Josephus preserves another narrative that's important of the rededication history. So he confirmed what remained silent. Symbolic observances arise from comparing sources. So Josephus, you have the 25th day of Kislev, 8-day dedication, the restoration of temple worship, and annual commemoration. It shows that by the 1st century AD, Hanukkah was established, recognized, and observed boldly among Yehudim and Israelites that were dedicated to themselves. They called it the Festival of Lights. It does not explicitly mention a miracle of oil or the later rabbinical memorial ritual, menorah, which says they lighted the lights of the menorah, and it's a myth. I guess we could go into the Talmud and look what it says. I have not yet, I'll be honest. So the lights is symbolic of being in him and united to him and being at liberty, as opposed to it being against the Greek law. Therefore, modern Hanukkah rituals, the 8-day lighting, the candles, they are not attested by Josephus. It's later traditions. So I said it doesn't really necessarily invalidate them, because if you can learn something out of them, maybe there's something to be learned. But from looking at other scholarship books, the temple rededication, the national deliverance, the military victory, the restoration of worship, it's not the oil miracle that makes it miraculous. There are several other 8-day miracles that happened that nobody knows about that are much more poignant. So, oh, look at that, I got to the end. Dun, dun, dun. It's been a really fascinating piece, because we used to do, when I was in the Messianic congregations of Yahshua, Hanukkah was a really big event. But as we left those congregations and lived in the wilderness where we have no other mishpokah, we started doing much more diligent studies. And it's not that we actually fell away from doing this, but doing it here. This is the temple that we are to dedicate. And we are to allow Yahshua, our light, to enter into our tabernacle and be that light to shine our house. And we are to practice excellent good works, that others will see those works and see the light that comes forth, so they can also give edification to Yahweh. Let your light be so shine before men that they see your tov righteous works.